Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've lived on the shores of Kellum Lake for 25 years. I know this water the way some people know their own homes. Every depth, every current, every spot where the walleye gather in spring and where the northern pike hunt in summer. I've seen the lake in every mood, mirror still at dawn, churning with whitecaps during autumn storms, frozen solid under 3 feet of ice in the depths of January. My name is Emmett Sharpe. I'm 47 years old, and I make my living as a fishing guide and caretaker, taking tourists out on the water during the season and maintaining the handful of cabins I rent to visitors. It's a quiet life, solitary in ways that suit me, connected to the rhythms of the natural world in ways that most people never experience. I thought I knew this lake completely. I was wrong. It was early November when I first heard the sound. The tourists had gone home. For the season, the summer cabins stood empty, and I was alone on the water doing a final check of my equipment before winter set in. The morning was still, the lake flat as glass, the kind of perfect silence that only exists in the North Woods after the birds have migrated south. That's when I noticed it. A low hum felt more than heard, vibrating somewhere deep in my chest. I assumed it was my boat's motor idling rough, but when I checked, the engine was off. The hum continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once, from the water, from the air, from inside my own body. I placed my hand on the surface of the lake and felt it vibrating, a subtle tremor running through the water itself, as if something far below was breathing. The sound faded after a few minutes, and I convinced myself it was nothing, a distant plane, a geological tremor, something with a rational explanation. But it came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Always early, always when the lake was still, always that same low hum that resonated in my bones rather than my ears. I started paying attention to it, trying to understand what I was perceiving. I asked around town, Gus Lindholm at the bait shop, Vera Pettit at the general store. Neither of them had heard anything unusual. They looked at me with concern, probably wondering if I was developing tinnitus or some other medical condition. But the sound wasn't in my ears. It was in the water. I was certain of it. I took my boat out at dawn one morning, determined to locate the source. I motored to different parts of the lake, trying to pinpoint where the hum was strongest. The sound seemed to come from everywhere equally. No matter where I went, the intensity didn't change. But when I reached the deepest part of the lake, near the center, something shifted. The sound wasn't louder here, but it was clearer, more defined. Not just a hum, but something with texture, with variation, almost like breathing or singing. Kellum Lake is deep, nearly 300 feet at its lowest point, carved into the bedrock by glaciers 12,000 years ago. I've fished these waters for a quarter century, but I've never thought much about what lies at the very bottom. The usual things, I assumed. Rock and silt and the bones of ancient fish. Now, I wasn't so sure. I visited the library in town and searched for information about the lake. I found references to Native American legends, Stories passed down through generations about spirits that lived in the deep water. One account mentioned a voice that sang before the world had ears to hear it. I dismissed it as folklore, but the phrase stayed with me, circling in my mind like a fish that wouldn't take the bait. 2 weeks after I first noticed the sound, Gus Lindholm came to find me. He looked troubled, his weathered face creased with confusion. He'd been out fishing at dawn, he said, and he'd heard something strange, a hum coming from the water. Not in his ears, but in his chest, in his bones. He described exactly what I'd been experiencing. We went out together the next morning and confirmed we were both hearing the same thing. Whatever the sound was, it wasn't just my imagination. Over the following weeks, more people started hearing it. Vera Pettit heard it while walking her dog near the shore. A family renting one of my cabins mentioned it over dinner. The local pastor heard it during an early morning prayer walk. The sound wasn't getting louder, but more people could perceive it, as if it was becoming easier to hear, or as if something was changing in the people themselves. I noticed a pattern. The people who heard the sound were those who spent time near the lake. The more time you spent by the water, the sooner you started hearing it. Tourists who visited briefly never noticed anything. But locals, people who lived on the shores, people who worked on the water, we all began to hear it eventually. It was as if the sound was tuning us, adjusting our perception until we could receive its frequency. As I listened more carefully over the following weeks, I began to perceive that the sound wasn't simple. It had structure, variation, a kind of rhythm that wasn't quite regular, that followed rules I couldn't understand. Not mechanical, not biological, something else entirely. I started recording it with my phone, but the recordings never captured it properly. On playback, there was only silence, or a faint static that bore no resemblance to what I heard in person. The sound existed for human perception, but not for digital instruments, and it did something to those who heard it. I noticed that when I was on the water listening to the hum, I felt a strange peace. Not happiness, not calm, something deeper, almost like recognition, as if I was hearing something I'd always known but couldn't remember. Other locals described similar feelings, a sense of familiarity, of homecoming, of understanding without words. Late one night, over whiskey on his porch, Gus shared a theory. What if it's not making a sound, he said. What if it is the sound? I didn't understand at first. I mean, what if there's no creature down there, no machine, no thing that's making noise? What if the sound itself is what's alive? The idea was strange, but something about it resonated with me. The sound didn't feel like a product, like something created by a source. It felt like a presence, like something that existed as vibration itself. Word of the phenomenon reached a researcher at the State University. Dr. Nora Fielding, an acoustic scientist, arrived with equipment I didn't recognize. Hydrophones, spectrometers, recording devices designed to capture sounds that human ears couldn't process. I took her out on the lake and showed her where the sound was strongest. Her equipment detected something, but the readings made no sense. The sound registered on her instruments, but the frequency was impossible, lower than anything natural, lower than should be audible to humans. The waveform didn't match any known pattern. Not seismic, not biological, not mechanical. More disturbing, the sound appeared to be coming from below the lake bed itself. Not from the water, not from caves in the rock, but from somewhere deeper, from the bedrock, from the earth's crust, from somewhere that should be solid stone. Dr. Fielding's analysis revealed something unexpected. The sound wasn't new. Based on the resonance patterns, it had been going on for a very long time. Not years or decades, but potentially millions of years. The lake had formed around the sound, not the other way around. It's like a pearl forming around a grain of sand, Dr. Fielding explained. The water gathered here because of the vibration. The lake exists because the sound exists. I asked what could possibly make a sound for millions of years. She didn't have an answer. The people who heard the sound began to change in subtle ways. We became quieter, more contemplative. We spent more time by the water, drawn to the source of the hum. Conversations grew less frequent, as if words were starting to feel inadequate. I noticed myself speaking less, listening more, not just to the sound, but to everything. The world seemed fuller somehow, richer in texture, as if I was perceiving layers that had always been there but hidden. Those who heard the sound began to feel connected to each other. Not telepathy, nothing so dramatic, just an awareness, a sense of sharing something profound. When Gus and I sat on the dock together, we didn't need to speak. We were both listening to the same thing, both feeling the same resonance. It was isolating in one sense. We couldn't explain it to those who didn't hear it, but bonding in another. And there was the pull. Some of the listeners developed a desire to get closer to the sound. Vera Pettit started swimming in the lake despite the cold November water. A young man from town was found in a rowboat at 3 a.m, just drifting over the deepest part of the lake. I felt the pull myself, a gentle urge to dive, to descend, to get closer to whatever was singing in the depths. I resisted, but the desire didn't go away. A professional diver named Leland Voss heard about the phenomenon and arrived uninvited. He'd done dives in lakes and oceans around the world, exploring caves and wrecks at extreme depths. Kellum Lake's 300 feet was challenging, but within his capabilities. He wanted to see what was at the bottom. He wanted to find the source. I warned him that the sound affected people, that it created a compulsion to get closer. He dismissed my concerns. He was a professional, trained to handle psychological pressures. I served as his surface support the next morning as he descended into the lake. He reported what he saw as he went down, the usual progression of a glacial lake, light fading, temperature dropping, visibility decreasing. At 200 feet, he reported that the sound was much stronger. At 250 feet, he went quiet for several minutes. When he spoke again, his voice was strange, distant. "There's no bottom," he said. "The lake doesn't end, it just keeps going." Leland surfaced an hour later, well ahead of his planned dive time. He wouldn't talk about what he saw, wouldn't describe what happened after 250 feet. His equipment had recorded video, but when we reviewed it, the footage showed only darkness and static after a certain depth. He packed his gear and left that afternoon. I watched him drive away and wondered what he'd seen down there. Dr. Fielding returned after weeks of analyzing her data. She had a theory that she was almost afraid to share. Sound is vibration, she explained. Matter is also vibration at a fundamental level. Particles, waves, energy, it's all the same thing at different frequencies. She theorized that the thing beneath the lake was sound that had achieved permanence, not a creature that made noise, but noise that had become a creature. What if sound came before matter? She asked. What if the universe started not with light, but with a tone, a vibration that everything else crystallized around? The thing beneath Kellum Lake might be a remnant of that primordial sound, not an echo, but the original, still resonating after billions of years, still vibrating at a frequency that predated everything. I asked why it was becoming audible now, why more people could hear it. Either the sound is getting stronger, Dr. Fielding said, or human perception is shifting to accommodate it. The people who hear it aren't being infected or altered. They're remembering. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We're all made of the same vibration. The sound beneath the lake is just older, purer. When you hear it, you're recognizing something that's been inside you all along. Those who heard the sound began gathering at the lake each dawn. It started with just Gus and me, but others joined. 12, then 24, then more. We stood on the shore or sat in boats, listening together. No one organized these gatherings. They just happened. The sound pulled us together, synchronized us, created a congregation without a religion. The longer we listened, the more we understood. Not facts, not information, something deeper, something that couldn't be put into words. I began to perceive the world differently. I saw the trees and rocks and water as temporary configurations, patterns in a medium that was fundamentally sound. Everything was vibration. Everything was tone. A solid world was just music that had forgotten how to move. And I realized that the sound was offering something. Not threatening, not demanding, offering. Those who heard it could choose to listen more deeply, to let the sound fully in. If they did, they would understand what reality truly was, but that understanding might change them permanently, might make them unable to see the world the way they used to. Vera Pettit made a choice that others hadn't dared. One morning she walked into the lake and didn't stop. Witnesses saw her wade in up to her waist, her chest, her shoulders. She kept walking, descending the slope that led to the deep water until she disappeared beneath the surface. We searched for 3 days. Boats, divers, everything we could muster. We found nothing. No body, no trace. Vera was presumed drowned. But then, a week later, a fisherman reported seeing something in the deep water, a shape moving, rising toward the surface and then descending again. Others saw it too, a pale form in the depths, human-shaped, but somehow different. I took my boat out and looked down into the clear water. I saw Vera, or something that had been Vera, swimming far below. She wasn't struggling, wasn't drowning. She was moving with purpose, with grace. She'd become part of the sound. The listeners discussed what had happened to Vera. Dr. Fielding theorized that she hadn't died. She'd transformed. She chose to merge with the sound completely, to let go of her solid form and become pure vibration. The shape in the water wasn't a body. It was a pattern, a waveform that still resembled the person it used to be. I realized that the sound was offering this choice to everyone who heard it, not forcing, not demanding, inviting. Those who wanted to could join it, become part of the primordial tone, exist as vibration forever. Those who didn't want to could remain as they were, living their brief, solid lives, eventually returning to silence. I struggled with what I'd learned. If everything was sound, if matter was just frozen music, if death was just a return to vibration, then everything I thought was real was just a temporary arrangement. My life, my work, my memories, my relationships. All of it just patterns in a medium that would eventually flow back to its source. It was terrifying. It was also, somehow, peaceful. As winter deepened, I felt the pull more intensely. The sound called to me every morning, promising understanding, promising connection, promising an end to the isolation of being a single note in an infinite symphony. I watched the shape that was Vera moving in the depths, and I envied her peace. Part of me wanted to walk into the water and never come back, but I wasn't ready to let go. I thought about my life, my work, the things I still wanted to do. I thought about Gus and the other listeners, the community that had formed around this strange phenomenon. I thought about the simple pleasure of a cold morning on the water, the tug of a fish on the line, the taste of coffee from a thermos. The sound was vast and eternal, but there was something valuable in being small and temporary too. I decided to stay, not because I didn't believe what the sound was offering, but because I wasn't finished with my current form. I'd keep listening, keep understanding, keep feeling the resonance in my bones, but I wouldn't descend. Not yet. Not until I was ready. Winter settled over Kellum Lake. Ice formed on the surface. Snow blanketed the shore. The sound continued beneath the ice, felt rather than heard now, a vibration that traveled through the frozen water. The listeners continued their gatherings, standing on the ice, in the grey dawn, feeling the hum through our boots. Vera's shape was glimpsed occasionally, moving beneath the ice like a ghost. New people arrived, having heard rumors, and some of them began to hear the sound too. The community grew. The understanding spread. I found a kind of peace in the new reality. I knew the truth about the world, that it was vibration, that it was song, that everything solid was temporary. The knowledge didn't frighten me anymore. It comforted me. I was part of something vast and ancient, even if I was just a small note in the symphony. Someday, I would return to the source, but not today. Spring came. The ice melted. The lake opened again. I took my boat out for the first time since winter, feeling the old familiar rhythm of the water beneath me. The sound was stronger now, or maybe I just heard it more clearly after all these months. I motored to the center of the lake, to the deepest point, and cut the engine. I sat in silence, letting the sound wash over me. I felt the connection to everything, the water, the sky, the distant shore, the shape that moved in the depths. I understood that I wasn't separate from any of it. I was a wave in the same ocean, a note in the same song. I finally comprehended what the sound was. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a force. It wasn't a phenomenon. It was the voice of existence itself, the tone that everything vibrated around. It had been singing since before time began, and it would keep singing after everything else was gone. The lake was just a place where the singing was easier to hear, I sat in my boat as the sun rose over the water. I listened to the sound that came from beneath the lake, the tone that underlied everything. I didn't know how many more mornings I would have, how many more seasons, how many more years, but I knew that when I was ready, the sound would be waiting. It had always been waiting. It would always be waiting. And someday, when I was finished being Emmett Sharpe, finished being solid, finished being temporary, I would let go and I would return to the song. But not today. Today, I was just a man in a boat, listening to the water, watching the sun paint the lake gold and red, feeling the cold air on my face and the gentle rock of the waves beneath me. And that was enough. That had always been enough. The sound rose from the depths, ancient and patient. It didn't demand anything from me. It just was, the way it had always been, the way it would always be. I understood now that the sound wasn't trying to take anything from us. It wasn't trying to convert us or consume us. It was simply existing, the way a mountain exists, the way a star exists. We were the ones who chose to listen. We were the ones who chose to understand. And we were the ones who chose when to let go. Vera had made her choice. Someday, I would make mine. But the sound didn't care when that happened. It had been singing for billions of years. It could wait a little longer. I started the engine and turned the boat towards shore. There was work to do, cabins to repair, equipment to maintain, a life to live, small and temporary and precious. The sound faded as I moved away from the deep water, but it didn't disappear. It was always there now, a constant presence beneath the surface of everything. I would hear it every morning for the rest of my life. I would feel it in my bones, in my chest, in the spaces between my thoughts. And someday, when I was ready, I would follow Vera into the depths. But not today. Today the sun was warm and the water was beautiful and I was alive. That was the gift of being temporary, the gift of being a single note in an infinite symphony. Every note mattered. Every voice added something to the song, even the small ones, even the brief ones, even the ones that faded into silence. The sound beneath the lake had taught me that, and I was grateful. I tied my boat to the dock and walked up toward my cabin. Behind me, the lake stretched out under the morning sun, calm and deep and full of secrets. And far below the surface, something ancient and patient continued to sing. It would still be singing long after I was gone. But right now, in this moment, we were singing together. And that was enough. That was everything.